May 28, 1940. A room full of the most powerful men in Britain, and every single one of them was afraid.
The German army had torn through France in 18 days. 300,000 British soldiers trapped on a beach. The sea behind them, the enemy closing in. And inside the cabinet room, someone said, "Talk to Hitler. Cut a deal. Save what you can." It was the most reasonable suggestion anyone had made all week.
And a 65-year-old man that most people in that room didn't trust looked him in the eye and said no.
What happened next didn't just save Britain. It changed the shape of the entire world. And the reason it happened will surprise you. Because this man had spent 40 years being wrong. To understand why Churchill said no in that room, you have to go back 50 years. To a little boy writing desperate letters home from boarding school. Letters that were never answered. His father was brilliant, charismatic, and completely cold toward his son. The one person whose approval he needed most simply wasn't interested. Then in 1895, his father died, without ever once telling his son he believed in him. Churchill was 20 years old.
Remember that wound. It explains everything that comes next.
He threw himself into danger as a soldier, in a way that made other men nervous. In 1899, Boer forces captured him in South Africa. He escaped, walked 300 miles through enemy territory, came home a celebrity, entered parliament, and spent the next 40 years becoming one of the most controversial failures in British political history. Here is what most people skip over. In 1915, he championed an attack through the Dardanelles. Brilliant on paper, catastrophic in execution. Allied troops landed at Gallipoli on beaches that were death traps. 8 months of slaughter. Over 130,000 soldiers killed, wounded, or missing. Churchill's name attached to every single one of them.
He resigned, went to fight in the trenches. And here's the thing nobody talks about. He almost never came back.
A decade in the political wilderness. No office, no influence, largely ignored. Drinking too much. Fighting the depression he called his black dog. But he kept speaking. Warning about Adolf Hitler. Warning about what was coming. Every single time, nobody listened. In 1938, Chamberlain flew to Munich. Came back waving a piece of paper. Peace for our time. Churchill called it a catastrophe. Britain was offered a choice between war and dishonor. She chose dishonor. She will get war.
Called a warmonger. Told he was wrong. He was right. Now remember that moment, because it becomes the most important moment of his life.
September 1939. Germany invaded Poland. Britain declared war. Chamberlain, with nowhere else to turn, brought Churchill back. The Navy sent a signal to all ships. 3 words: Winston is back. 8 months later, Chamberlain fell. 2 names put forward as replacement. Lord Halifax, steady, cautious, trusted by almost everyone. And Churchill, the man half the cabinet still didn't trust. The man who had been wrong so many times. On May 10, 1940, Winston Churchill became Prime Minister. And here is the part most people don't know. On the exact same day, Germany launched its full invasion of Western Europe. The French army was collapsing within hours. Inside his own cabinet, the most senior men were already asking, should we negotiate? Halifax pressed for talks. Logical, reasonable, persuasive. On May 28th, Churchill refused. Nations that go down fighting rise again. Nations that surrender find themselves without hope. He wasn't certain they could win, but he was completely certain they should not stop. Then he walked out of the war cabinet and into the room where the full cabinet of 25 ministers waited. Told them the truth. No spin. No promises he couldn't keep. The room erupted. Ministers who had barely spoken to him in years crowded around him, cheering, banging tables, grabbing his shoulders.
It wasn't a speech. It was a room full of frightened men deciding together that they would not give up.
The Dunkirk evacuation began the next day. 338,000 soldiers off the beaches in 9 days. a miracle of deliverance. But wars are not won by evacuations. France fell. Britain stood alone. The most powerful military force in history, 90 miles across the water. And Churchill got on the radio. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall never surrender." Hear those words the way someone heard them in 1940. France gone. The army barely escaped. The bombs not yet falling, but coming.
This voice, not promising victory, just refusing to accept defeat.
The Battle of Britain began that summer. Young pilots flew against overwhelming numbers, day after day. The margins were razor thin, but the RAF did not break. Churchill visited bombed cities, walked through rubble. People wept when they saw him. Sometimes he wept too. In October 1940, Hitler abandoned his invasion, turned east toward Russia. Britain had survived. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few.
But here is where the story gets complicated. Stay with me, because this part matters.
The Bengal famine of 1943 killed between 2 and 3 million people. His policies contributed to its severity. His attitudes toward India were those of a Victorian imperialist. The man who saved liberal democracy in Europe. The man whose empire denied it to hundreds of millions elsewhere. Both true, both the same man. June 1944. Allied forces landed in Normandy. The tide had turned. May 1945. Germany surrendered. 2 months later, Churchill lost the election. His wife said perhaps it was a blessing in disguise. Churchill replied, "If it is very effectively disguised." He died January 24, 1965, 90 years old. An entire century, and he shaped a great deal of it.
Would he, without the pain, without the rejection, without the wilderness, have had the strength to say no in that cabinet room? I don't think so.
In the summer of 1940, one man's refusal to accept defeat kept open the possibility that the war could still be won. What the world looks like if Britain makes peace that summer? Nobody can say, but it does not look like this. Flawed, brilliant, contradictory, infuriating, often wrong, occasionally magnificent. A man who spent his whole life preparing, without knowing it, for 5 years that changed everything. And when the moment came, he was ready.
If this helped your English, share it with one person. My name is John. See you in the next one.